item, Madam Clerk.
Item 1 is the minutes of the regular council meeting held Monday, November 19th, 2012. The recommendation is that council approve those minutes.
It'd be right to move in second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Next item.
Item 2 are minutes of the Tri-Cities Homelessness and Housing Task Group meeting held Friday, November 2nd, 2012. The recommendation is that council receive those minutes.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 3 are minutes of the Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting held Tuesday, November 6th. The recommendation is that council receive those minutes.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item.
Next item is a recommendation arising out of those committee minutes regarding the terms of reference. The recommendation is that council approve the revised Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee terms of reference.
Been rightly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Robinson.
Yes, thank you. I just want to see if we can amend, if I can propose a slight amendment to this, to the revised terms of reference, to slightly change one word in the policy and procedure manual under the committee mandate, which is, I don't know what page it is. It's the second page of 3.3. Under the committee mandate, the third bullet, it says to review design plans for civic buildings and provide advice to council. And I think it should be, it should include public spaces, not just civic buildings. That this group has been looking at our public squares and our parks. And right now it only says civic buildings, and it was only brought to my attention after the meeting, and would like to know if anyone would support that amendment. So, well, facilities, but includes all of our public, our city lands. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Next item.
So we'll take that as a friendly amendment to the terms of reference. Item 3.4 is another recommendation arising out of those minutes regarding the event accessibility checklist. The recommendation is that staff be directed to include the event accessibility checklist with the information provided to individuals and organizations when they rent city facilities.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Councillor Robinson?
Well, I don't know if my colleagues want to get me to provide a brief description, or do they have enough information? Okay.
That's it? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Next item.
Item 3.6 is another recommendation arising out of those minutes regarding the petition for creation of a Canadian Disabilities Act. The recommendation is that Council put forward a recommendation through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities urging the Government of Canada to develop a Canadian Disabilities Act.
So moved.
Second. Been rightly moved and seconded. In discussion. All
yes,
those.
Yes.
Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah. Thank you. This is a subject of which I know very little, and to ask the federal government to pass a piece of legislation when we don't know what this legislation would be other than the title, I think would be imprudent of us. I did do a bit of research because I was curious about this, and I found out that there's actually been multiple requests over a long time from disability groups to the federal government asking for the passage of such an act, and different federal governments of different political stripes have turned down that request. Now, obviously, I would think that they had good reasons, and my research shows that one of the reasons is that, well, unlike the United States, which does have a Disabilities Act, and this is one of the reasons that the Canadian groups ask for this, is the U.S. has it. Unlike the U.S., Canada does have a Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, and that charter does specifically guarantee the right not to be discriminated against, and rights for disabilities. Canada also has a Canadian Human Rights Act, and BC has a BC Human Rights Act. And all of these things do guarantee rights for the disabled. A precedent that would be set, I guess, if one were to pass a Canadian Disabilities Act, that other groups would come along and say, well, other groups that currently have protection under the Charter Rights and Freedoms would come and say, well, we want our act too. So there's how many different categories of protected people by religion, by race, ethnicity, age, all sorts of stuff. So are we going to then open the door to that as well when the protections are already there? So that's just my initial response to this, not having actually heard the specific argument from this group about why it thinks it needs us to support this. So I would be loath to go ahead and support this without knowing what a Canadian Disabilities Act would say. We know what the title of it would be, but we don't know what it would contain. Any Canadian Disabilities Act about anything? So I think it would be imprudent to proceed with this stage. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. As the chair of the committee, perhaps I can enlighten Councillor O'Neill with a little bit of some of the conversation around that table. And our volunteers on this committee have been looking to other jurisdictions like the U.S., Australia, and Ontario that all have disabilities acts. Ontario has their own. And the idea is that when you have a disability act, it actually puts together requirements that that you have to have certain design elements, not just in your building code, but right now we do a hit and miss process. We look for sort of an outcome, but we don't really have a very good descriptive legislation that tells us exactly what we need to be able to do. So we actually miss lots of opportunities for accessibility because there's nothing that provides a very strict, clear guideline like they have in the States. And so I just want to point out that there is a political commitment to the legislation by the Conservative Party of Canada that was made in 2005 in their election platform, that they said that they would introduce a National Disability Act to promote reasonable access to medical care, medical equipment, education, employment, transportation, and housing for Canadians with disabilities. But there hasn't been any action on that, and so this is to appeal to the sitting government and ask them to act on something that they promised to make back in 2005.
Okay, any further discussion? There is a motion on the floor. Am I correct?
Yes.
Ms. Laurie? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Hodge, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Reimer, and Councillor Alverson. It is...
And me.
And you too?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Reid, so it's defeated. Go ahead, Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I think probably a better recommendation, if we could, coming out of the committee, would be to write a letter to the government asking them what is the status of the this Disabilities Act that they had made a promise to create, and that I could support.
Are you moving it that way?
Sure, I don't mind writing a letter and asking them where it is, and if they can even tell us what's in it.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been rightly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Next item.
Item 4, minutes of the Finance Standing Committee meeting held Tuesday, November 13th. The recommendations that Council receive those minutes.
Has been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Next item.
Item 5 are minutes of the Finance Standing Committee meeting held Wednesday, November 14th. The recommendation is that those minutes be received.
It's been rightly moved and seconded. In discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item.
The next 4 items are arising out of tonight's public hearing. Item 6 is City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4351-2012 for 954 Charland Avenue. The recommendation is that Council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4351-2012.
It's been rightly moved and seconded. In discussion on this item. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Next item.
Item 7, City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4349, 2012 for 279 Tenby Street. Recommendations that Council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4349, 2012.
It's been read and moved and seconded. Councillor Reid.
I'm not going to support this for 4 units on that property. I could probably support 3 because of its rather tenuous situation where it backs up to the freeway. It's at the end of not a full cul-de-sac, and there is not enough parking in my view. So I have difficulty. These are not small units. They're actually quite large units, so they're probably going to have families in them. And I have a concern about that there's not enough parking on site. Thank you.
Councillor Hodge.
Yeah, I mean, I like the look of it. I think that this is the sort of thing we should be doing. It's certainly, there's the space on the property to do it, but I have a real concern about parking. I drove down into that area, that cul-de-sac, you couldn't put one more car in there. And I look at the property and I see that there's possibly the potential to add a bit more parking. I would be curious to see if it could be brought back with more parking, but this is not an area that is on a heavily serviced area for transit, and so I think that we are going to see lots of cars for the people that are in that development, and I just don't think there's enough off-street parking, because I think that's where some of the people are going to park. There's no provision for a visitor spot, so I can't support it in its present form.
Okay, Councillor Asmussen.
Well, I'm going to be in the same vein. I don't think parking is enough for this area due to the restricted parking. If there was another access onto Goodwin Court and through that area and some extra parking in that area, which isn't at this time, I think the 4 units on this site with only 8 parking stalls, but I do want staff, and I think this is just on issue in this area, but I do want staff to look at how we deal with parking in neighborhoods, parking on streets where, you know, today people, and I'll go through a lot of areas in the city, I've driven through where people don't use their garages, they use it for storage, and they're parking on the street, and our numbers get kind of skewed when we talk about our parking. And I think we have to find a way of dealing with that non-use of the parking garage and that excess cars going onto the street and causing a lot of issues in those areas. So I think that's part of this. But for this development right here, I think it's a good development. I think Councillor Reid stated that rather than being 4, it went down to 3 and added in more parking. I could support this. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Well, I actually am going to support this because I think if we are really going to be, these folks, this developer is actually giving us more parking than is required. So either we support the parking requirements that we've asked them to consider when looking at these kinds of units, or we don't. And so we're actually getting extra parking, 2 extra spots, in fact. And to turn it down, I think, is really not abiding by our own parking requirements. So I am going to support this, and I actually, what I find very fascinating about this, because there is actually no parking available, like there is no place to park on the street down there, it will force people to clean up their garages because there's no place to park. It will also be a real test, and I'd really like to, if this should pass, I'd like to hear from the neighbors that if it does become a problem, that this is exactly where we start putting residents with these addresses. This is your parking. And it forces these folks to really pay attention to, you have adequate parking. Because we have to start changing the culture of how we see our relationship with our cars. That there is no such thing as free parking, and I'm sure we're going to hear lots about it in the next couple items. There's no such thing, and I think that we have asked in our Housing Choices program, we have set out some clear guidelines, And this particular developer has said, okay, those are the clear guidelines, and I'm going to even put in 2 extra spots because this is a large piece of property, and I can do that. So to penalize a developer who's gone above and beyond, I don't think is appropriate. And I think if it becomes a problem, then we start using our demand management strategies, and we start putting in, saying these are for these residents. We've seen it in other places in Vancouver where that gets really tight, and it forces people to minimize the use of their vehicles. Thank you.
All true. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to basically echo what Councillor Robinson just said. If we have a housing choices strategy, and I've heard everybody around this council table speak in favor of that and speak in favor of the better use of the land, the infilling, the densification, then it's got to mean something. When a developer comes to us with a plan, above all, that should mean that we stick with that plan. I mean, he's not, as Councillor Robinson said, our housing choices policy calls for just 1.5 stalls per unit, and we're getting 2 here. So it's above all, it's above and beyond. It's giving us more, and I think this is a real test here. If we reject this, are we actually saying that we need to relook at our entire housing choices strategy? And are we prepared to do that and send that message, or do we want to stand by what this council has in its wisdom in the past, something that I've agreed with, put into play? So we have to think very carefully about this. So above all, our reputation, I think, is on the line as well. Do we mean what we said we've meant? The stuff that we passed? Or do we say, no, it's going to be arbitrary? Every time it come before us, we're going to hem and haw, we're going to say, well, actually, no, we didn't mean what we said we meant. We meant something else. So I think I will be voting in favor of this because I want to send a strong message that we're going to stand by our word.
Councillor Nicholson.
I'm going to support this. I've thought hard about it. But I think you're right. Many of you are right. We've told people what it is we expect of them. They've gone beyond that. But I think there may be circumstances where people come in with proposals that are on side with what we've proposed. Variances go both ways. People come to us and ask for variances. It remains in council's hands to vary in the other direction from time to time when it seems appropriate. One of the arguments that was running through my mind as I was thinking of going the other way was that, yes, we have a standard. We say 1.5 per unit, and that's how we do it, and this is a big piece of land. It's a funny shaped piece of land. It's sitting at the end of a peculiar street with a tiny little cul-de-sac and no access to any on-street parking. The standards that we set are for a kind of standard building lot. So at my house, you can park 2 cars in front of my house, unless your neighbors are having a party. So that's one of the things that I looked at. But I think these people have done a great job of taking what we said we wanted to see happen and applying it in a difficult situation, and I think we have to support them in doing it. Thank you.
Councillor Reamer.
Thank you very much. Well, I too am going to be supporting this. I really like actually the looks of the development. There's 2 access routes into the development, and there's 8 parking spots, which is 2 more than they had to provide. That's basically 2 per house. Plus, I suspect that they could actually get some additional parking in there as well. And so, therefore, I think that there is going to be enough parking, and I'm going to support this on that basis. I'm looking really forward to this. We did support the housing choices strategy, and we need to get on with the business of doing our housing choices, and this will support that. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussions? All those in favor? Opposed? It is, it's opposed by Councillor Hodge, Councillor Reid, Councillor Edmondson. It is carried. I'm in favor of it too. Next item.
Item 8 is City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4348-2012 for 910 Delestre Avenue. Recommendation is that Council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to zoning amendment bylaw number 4348-2012.
Second.
It's been rightly moved and seconded. In discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Next item.
Item 9 is City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4352-2012, text amendment for parking requirements related to the transit-oriented development strategy. The staff recommendation is that Council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to zoning amendment bylaw number 4352-2012, and 2, that Council authorize staff to establish 2 reserve funds with revenues received through the payment in lieu of parking program directed to a parking reserve fund and a multimodal infrastructure fund as outlined in the report of the General Manager, Engineering and Public Works.
So moved.
Is there a seconder? There's no seconder. It's not. There's no seconder. You seconded? Okay. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I've given this a lot of thought. I mean, a lot of thought. And there's a lot of things that I've heard tonight that I'm really in a quandary about this. I really am. I'm sort of sitting on this wire. But I really think I will support the reduced parking to 5%, an additional 5%. I would support that. I'll certainly support the $20,000 per stall. But this year, in 2012, I don't think I can support the 1.35. The one, which is the majority of the suites we get, is 1 parking stall per 1 unit. Everybody else in the Lower Mainland here is higher. The 2 bedrooms, I see Richmond and Surrey, and they're keeping theirs at 1.5, and of course, and allowing reduced parking, which I think is fair. Burnaby, they're at 1.35. They have bus service. Oh my God, you see a bus at least every 15 minutes somewhere in Burnaby, which is amazing. New Westminster, of course, is a little bit higher at 1.4, but even they have better bus service. Actually, the whole world has better bus service than Coquitlam does. That's where I am on this. And the reason I want to do that, I would like to take a moment to say a few things. We have a lot of what people refer to as unpurchased stalls, and I'm only going to talk about Coquitlam, not the rest of the Lower Mainland. But in Coquitlam, people say, oh, well, I walked through that building, and there's all kinds of places that are vacant. Well, maybe what they need to do is check and find out how many units have been bought by investors that are just sitting there with vacant parking spaces and nobody's using them, for one thing. I think somebody made a point tonight to say that our market needs to evolve so that we can get the car shares, and thank you for that, because you're right. We haven't evolved enough yet to get all these folks coming in with these TDMs, and we need to. And I think maybe we're just a bit premature. And I definitely think we need monitoring. We definitely need monitoring wherever we are. And the folks in the Northeast, they're doing their own monitoring. And even though it isn't this kind of parking, it just goes to let me know that we can sit here and play with plans on paper, but when it comes right down to the gravel and the curbs, that is what we're doing really working. And even though that's another type of parking, I still have to ask for the same thing down here. The reason I'm concerned around our SkyTrain stations and that, is if the folks from Northeast and the folks from anywhere else up on the hill, up on Austin and Como Lake and Ranch Park want to come down to the town center to do their shopping, they need a place to park. They need a place to park when they come for lunch at all of the little boutiques that we have that we're asking developers to put in. We're asking for all these podium, ground level businesses to be put in commercial space. And that's fine for us to ask, but that's a huge problem for them to lease all that space out. And I know discussing this, and we've talked about this flex space more, where a strata could have the main floor of the parking as some visitor that's locked off, but they could have public parking on the other side and use the flex space, and that could benefit the strata by just renting it out during the day. But it also does something else. If people can't park on the street to go to these shops and restaurants, they have parking that's close and not blocks away. Nobody in this day and age is going to park somewhere and walk 6 blocks in the rain, which we usually have, to go for a cup of tea or a coffee shop. It just doesn't make any sense. And I know there's going to be lots of people that are living in the apartments that just will walk, but I don't think anyone can do a commercial venture at the bottom of one of these high-rises and expect that only the folks in the apartments are the ones that are going to be keeping their businesses up and alive and running. It's easy parking. When you have a place in the town center that's easy parking, it will bring people, and I think somebody said that tonight. It will bring people close. It will bring visitors close. If I want to visit you and you're living in the town center and I know there's a parking spot close by, I'll come, I'll park there, not have to worry about my car, and go and visit you and visit the restaurants and do all the things I have to do. And it doesn't stop me from coming out to visit you. I think SkyTrain, to me, of course, SkyTrain to me is a double-edged sword. It's a wonderful thing to have in your community and bring new residents and new businesses and vibrancy to your town center. But if the densification and the parking isn't done right, it can be absolutely horrible to the surrounding neighborhoods and the neighbors that are sitting there now, where their streets become parking lots all day long and their quality of life has changed. And these residents have lived here for 30 or 40 years. So I would like to, if I have to err, it would be err on the side of caution, and for the next year stay where I am at 1.5, but with the 5% TDM and with the 20,000 per stall, and I would be very happy with that. And I could probably go on, but I won't. Thank you very much.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. I have a feeling that everybody's going to have it around the table is going to have a slightly different take on this, and we may have to put our heads together at the end of the night to figure out the best way to go forward. As all my colleagues have done over the weekend, and the last several weeks, we've been thinking a lot about this, and something about American Thanksgiving inspired me to come up with a metaphor to try to put all these pieces together. And you might have heard of the turducken. And a turducken is a turkey into which is stuffed a duck, into which is stuffed a chicken. And I thought, you know what, that's kind of what we're looking at with this thing here, because the turkey is the transit-oriented development strategy. The duck is the transit parking strategy, the 1.35 idea. And really, the littlest piece, the chicken, is the $20,000 per stall thing. It's not as consequential as the duck or the turkey. The turkey is the big thing, and we've already got that. Everybody's in agreement. So what we're looking for now is the duck and the chicken inside the duck. So I won't go there. Now, okay. Now, but just to help you visualize and conceptualize, if you will. Now, on the duck part of it, that's the proposal to go down to 1.35, with a further a 5% reduction if a TDM is in place. Above all, I think the issue that we have to consider when we're looking at that is the Metro survey that we did that was done of 80 sites, 82 bedroom sites that are near transit. And it was found there that the average demand, and I think this is very, very important, is 1.24 stalls per two-bedroom unit. You know, we had a lot of facts and figures thrown around in the last couple of hours on this issue. That's the big figure in my mind, the 1.24. So if that's the average demand, then we're, and if we want to be guided by market forces and want to make sure we get it right, and maybe take into account, I know the UDI guy said that we should even be under that or something, but I think the general feeling that we heard tonight from people, and I think general feeling around councils, would if we err on the side of safety, we want to err by providing a little more parking space than what the demand calls for. So we're saying 1.35 when the demand is actually 1.24, and you can get it down to 1.28 with TDM, transit demand management strategies in place. And that's pretty darn close to 1.24. So I think we're pretty close to the sweet spot there. And so I like that, and I will support that. And then we get down to, one more time, the chicken, right in the littlest part of this is the $20,000 thing. On first reading, I said that I thought that was a little too high. I said $15,000 would be more comfortable with. The mayor, who was here at the time, said that he supported the $15,000 as well. We hadn't talked about the issue before. I'm not sure how much difference $15,000 or $20,000 will make in the grand scheme of things. If we've actually hit the sweet spot at the 1.35 that can go down to 1.28, there might not be very many people taking this up anyway. The market will say, no, this is just about right. I was concerned, and at first reading I expressed this concern, and again earlier this evening I expressed the concern that this take-up, this $20,000, would be passed directly on to the condo buyer, and what does he or she get for that? Nothing, maybe even a parking lot 6 kilometers away. Won't be much there at all. But then again, and same staff member who provided the 1.24 figure, I believe, answered this question quite well in explaining it further by saying that actually this ability to buy your way out of the stall requirement at $20,000 a hit could be the difference that allows an entire development to go ahead, where in some spots you just couldn't have that development proceed with the 1.35 or the 1.28. So in that sense, if that is indeed the case, and I've got no reason to doubt it, that would be a tremendous benefit to the buyer. That buyer would be able to buy something that wouldn't be there otherwise. And if that thing wasn't there, you can bet that all the other apartments around there are going to be that much more expensive because the supply will be curtailed. So all of my concerns that I've had on this seem to have been met. So I'm not going to get hung up on the $15,000 to $20,000 figure. I also have done independent research on this. And by the way, one of our presenters earlier tonight, one of the members of the public, talked about developers already making $30,000 a stall and then charging $20,000. They'll be making that on the stall and passing that figure on. Well, when developers are paying $30,000 a stall and then charging that to a buyer to buy, they're not really making money on that. They're just passing on that's not pure profit for the developer in any sense at all. So, I went on a tangent and forgot the point from which I began. Sorry about that. Anyway, so those are the main points. I do think it's incredibly important that we have strategies in place a plan in place, or at least we can give an assurance now from staff that when this comes, if this comes into place, this new parking strategy, that there is a neighborhood protection plan. I know that that's what we heard from the Oakdale Neighborhood Association, that we need to know, we need to have some assurance that their neighborhood is going to be protected either through signage that says residents only, permits that say residents only, or something like that. Can the engineering or the planning department give us that assurance that Oakdale Neighborhood Association and other neighborhoods in there won't be overrun by people from not in their neighborhood trying to park in their neighborhood because there's not enough parking spaces in the new developments? Can we get that assurance?
Yes, that's on our work plan. The priority for this year was to try and get the numbers right on site, if you will, and that's what a lot of our staff time was spent in doing and coming up with the zoning bylaw amendments that are before you. The very next step in this process is to now roll it out on-street issues, and that is going to be a body of work that will be coming to the council during 2013 in terms of the various kinds of parking strategies that are available and which ones are applicable for specific areas in Coquitlam.
Thank you very much.
Sir Robinson.
Thank you. Well, parking, everyone wants it, and above all, no one wants to pay for it. And everyone wants certainty. So we've certainly heard that current residents want to make sure that we have sufficient parking for them and their needs, and developers are only, their concern is about future residents and their needs. But our job, above all, is to take care of everyone, all sides. So, and then, of course, we're heading into this transition, into this unknown territory, this sort of the final frontier for us. If we were in Star Trek, I can't come up with another one better than the turducken. I think that was better, but I was trying to do this Star Trek thing, and anyway, forget it. We'll stick with your turducken. So, I think what's really important as I think about making this decision and how to move forward, I think about the evidence, because I think that's all we have. Is we only have evidence. We have fear on one side. We have angst on the other side. We have, personal experience with challenging parking in the West End and, Lougheed Mall, all these other places. But I still need to go back because I don't know what the future holds. And I have to make a decision. Because I think if we don't make a decision, one of the things that I worry about, as I listen to Councillor Reid saying, I just want to sort of hold steady, is I think we can get it wrong. I think that we don't want to have surplus parking because that's very expensive. It's expensive for the developers. It's expensive for the buyers, and above all, they're actually going to pay the most. And we're really interested in making sure that we have some more affordable housing. We know how hard that is for everyone. So I keep going back to the evidence because I think, above all, that's the piece that I think we should use to guide our decision. And the evidence says that 1.35 is on the generous side. I mean, we've certainly heard from the development community that they think that's too generous, and we've heard from our residents that, don't give away, at all. Like, we want to make sure that we have parking. So I'm actually want to thank staff for coming up with something that sort of takes care of the angst and takes care of the anxiety. Because I do think that, and I do hope that that's the sweet spot. Because I do think, and I appreciate the fellow from UDI sort of saying, well, you want to find that sweet spot, that's important. And the truth is, if we find the sweet spot, then there ought not to be any uptake on this other parking stuff. And so it really is the chicken. Because really it should, if 1.35 stalls works, if it meets the demand, then they're not going to need to lower the parking rates because the market will demand that. And it would work fine. On top of that, we're giving them this extra little piece. So I'm a little annoyed actually with the letter and all that kind of stuff, because I think it was a little bit of a Chicken Little, the sky's falling. I don't think the sky's falling. So I'm comfortable with what staff have proposed. I also agree with Councillor O'Neill around this. I think residents current residents need certainty that we are prepared to act and to put in parking management strategies that protect their on-street parking from the changes that are coming. I know that Burnaby has had some practice with it, Richmond has had some practice with it, and Vancouver's had some practice with it. So we can turn to them and what their experience has been in terms of best practices, and that works. I do think that right now we feel like we don't have good transit, and it's true we don't. But I do believe that it is going to change with the Evergreen line. I do think that actually bus service is going to get a little bit better. Absolutely not in Burke Mountain. I mean, you guys are never going to get bus service. I'm sorry, you're not going to get that kind of stuff. But I do think it will shift our how things move around in the city, and I think we need to be prepared for it. So I am going to support it in its entirety because. Above all of this, I think this is a good plan, and I think we need to move forward. Thank you.
Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you. We've heard a lot of information tonight, a lot of different points of view. I want to thank the last two councillors. I think we have to have that report coming later in the year about how we deal with the parking impacts within the shoulder areas and those areas, and how we manage that. And I think we need to have an annual report to council on how the impacts in those neighborhoods on a regular basis, not every 3 years, because I think things can happen quickly and we need to adjust as that impact happens. So once we come forward with that report stating what some of the measures are of protecting and managing those areas, I think we need to have an annual update on what's happening in those areas, because we're walking into an area that, you know, we may be in the sweet spot, we may not be. And I think we also have to be looking at our rates to look at, are we going the right way or the wrong way? You know, we talked about a lot of things tonight, made some comments. I mean, we had some people say, well, you know, kids under 25, they're not going to have cars and drive. And well, my daughter's 27, she's got a car, her boyfriend has a car, he has a company vehicle, right? And all their friends have vehicles. And in today's day and age for kids, it's probably the cheapest time. You can get a car for $14,000, $16,000 brand new on the roads. It's never been as cheap a time for young people to own a vehicle. So when I hear that, I go, not with my daughter, her friends, and those kids, are they all just going to give up their cars even when they go into a transit-oriented development area? Biking in Coquitlam, there may be an uptake. Our uptake in biking in the last survey went from 1.6 overall to 1.8. Not a huge increase. And so in Coquitlam's an area that's maybe difficult to have increased cycling in. We're going to have it, but maybe not in the levels in flatter areas. Developers, by us moving to 1.35, if we go that way, are getting a 10% savings on their cost by those reducing size. So they're making a savings. We're providing them. This one I'm going to really sort of have some issues on that extra 5% for TDM, because I'm not sure about that part. When we talk about the development thing, we want to provide more affordable housing, charging the parking. There's no clear relationship that by eliminating parking is going to reduce the unit of the price. Remember, real estate is market driven by what the market's going to pay. And just because it might have come in at a price at the beginning, if the market's going up, those units and their pricing will go up. So while there may be a correlation, it's not 100% that saving would be passed on to the purchaser of that unit. When we allow, and I think Councillor Hodge raised this issue, to not purchase a second stall, there is, if you're a young person, the ability to say, well, we may have 2 cars, we won't purchase that because we want to save the money, we'll go out on the street. And that's where the shoulder areas, we need that plan to deal with and protect those areas from that going out in there. If they're going to buy in that area, they're going to have to find it difficult to park in that area and limit themselves to what the parking may be in that area. And I think that's the key to this whole thing, is how we manage that one part of it. Because if you were to provide 2 parking stalls within the project and that was a cost, I bet you most people would use those 2 parking stalls. So is this the right area? I'm not sure. I do think, though, that people are going to go below that 1.35 to 1.28 or lower. There's a fair, it's a trade-off between the two. They're getting a savings. we're taking a cost to help deal with, whether it's Coquitlam, town center, these areas, to put back some other transit. It may be parking garages, may not be, maybe other walkways, maybe other things to help in those areas deal with the impacts. But I think that is a fair way because it's an optional way for the development industry. They don't have to take it. It can give them a way to make their, as Councillor O'Neill said, their project far more profitable and cost effective with that in there. And I will echo Councillor Reid's issue that we're one and everybody's over one on the single unit. But once again, I think that's where I want to have a report yearly back tracking this type of issues. And I think we have to be willing to adjust because we're Coquitlam, we're not downtown Vancouver, not Burnaby. And I would say, though, to people that when we talk about transit service, we have way better transit service here than they do in Surrey. Surrey and the Langley area is probably the worst served for transportation issues in the lower mainland. Thank you.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you. Well, I always try to follow Councillor O'Neill's lead on these things. So I was really tempted to build a whole allegory around the concept of the haggis. But it seemed to me that there would just be no fun in that in the absence of the mayor, who of course is Scottish. And some of the people who did all this hard work might just possibly be offended and not see the humor in the haggis. So I'll tell you what I'm going to support. I think Councillor O'Neill's right. We're going to have to put our heads together and figure out how to deal with this. I'm wondering whether second and third reading and staff to hear everything that's said around the table and have some changes when they come back for fourth. But I'm not the clerk, so I don't know how to do that sort of thing. I support the 1.35. I think staff's done a great job of coming up with the best estimate, a reasonable little bit of comfort zone, the possibility of getting it down. If the developer really believes that the number is smaller, they have the means to get it down. And I think it's also important to remember that the stats that we're looking at are reasonably recent, but they're now. And the standards that we set here are for buildings that are going to be built over the next, 3, 4, 5 years? The trend is there. We know what direction our youth are going in, the people of tomorrow. They're not buying the cars. They're not buying as many cars. I hear what Councillor Asmundson says about it's never been cheaper to buy a car, $14,000 or $15,000. I think that maybe says something about the demand for cars. But it's perhaps not there. So the trend's there, and 135 is a good place to be. I support the $20,000 per stall. I think it will be seldom taken up, but when it is, it'll be because I need 4 more stalls to fit what I have to do, and I have to build a whole nother floor to do it. So it's a good deal for me to spend $80,000 to get out of those 4 stalls. And that'll work for us. But I think that we have to amend to make that funding area specific. If you raise it in Coquitlam, you spend it in Coquitlam. If you raise it in town center, you spend it in town center. And I wouldn't get any more specific than that. I don't think you've got to, the building's in this block, you've got to spend it in this block. It's the neighborhood. And stick to that. So that's one of the things I would like to see when we come back. I asked Ms. Mahorak about the TDM measures, and you know, sometimes I say things and they get given back to me, and I wrote down vague, and vague isn't good enough for me. I think allowing reductions in required parking in response to TDM, transportation demand management measures, is absolutely appropriate. But I think that we need to know what that means. I think we need to see, here's the list of measures, here's what they will buy you, Mr. Developer. If you support bicycles in this measure, that'll get you this. Because I think what the techniques that are available differ in their impact. Providing bicycle storage equal to 35% of the units in the building or something like that has an impact that directly relates to the need for parking in the building. Providing a co-op car stall has one value for a 100-unit building and a very different value for a 250-unit building. So dropping the parking requirement overall for that. So I would like to know what measures are available and what they're worth to the proponent. How they're going to be measured. I had initially written down that I wrote down what I need so that to get me on side. I need a parking management strategy. I understand that that's on the work plan, and I also understand that it's a big piece of work. But it's a major concern to the people whose lives are going to be affected by all the buildings that we build and all the cars that we put, hopefully not on their streets, but we'll see. Some of us have talked about driving into the West End, so we know what it can be like on the streets. I could be comfortable with a report that told me what the principles of our proposed parking demand strategy are. What is it that we want to accomplish? What are we going to try? And we're going to come up with a whole bunch of measures, but what are they intended to accomplish? Will they reduce, will they preserve the on-street parking in the shoulder areas for residents and visitors of that neighborhood? Well, I can't tell you what I want it to say, but I want to understand what it is, and I will trust, and I believe that the people in the city will trust that the parking strategy that we come up with will fulfill those principles. So those are things that I'm going to need before I can finally approve this matter.
Move that there's only 3 readings.
Well, I was looking for a clue from Ms. Lorb. So, yeah, I would amend to take this to second, third reading rather than fourth and final.
Councillor Hodge.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Talking on the amendment first, or we?
Pardon?
We've got an amendment on the floor.
Well, yes, okay, second and third reading. All those in favor? Opposed? I didn't get the vote.
Somebody wish to, somebody might, yes, I moved second and third.
Seconded.
I seconded.
Just leave it at that. Well, just hold it at third. Okay.
In that case, I'm done talking. Thank you.
So do you want to vote on the second, third reading, or you want to table it?
Well,
I think we did.
You did. Okay, thanks.
What do you think, Carrie?
Councillor Hodge.
I think that I would suggest that if council received new information or if there were substantive changes to the bylaw when it came back for fourth reading, that it would require another public hearing.
Then I'll ask staff's advice. I suspect, well, the things that I'm asking for are substantial changes, I think. And if that means that we have to go back to a public hearing, it means we have to go back to a public hearing, because I think they are important. And I think other councillors may have matters that could bring them on side. Keeping this alive, so would, to my mind, be better than deferring it.
Just a comment. I could envision, if you did give second and third reading, I can envision a report that I believe would satisfy Councillor Nicholson and still allow us to go forward on that. For example, we would outline our specific work plan and some of the principles that we would follow in terms of pursuing an on-street parking management strategy. I can envision giving some kind of rules around how the monies that would be raised through pay in lieu strategy would be utilized, but not actually changing the bylaw, but having informal rules that would govern behavior. One of the concerns I would put on the table is that over the fullness of time, I could see developing a tracking system to so that it's relatively equal area to area. But if you are too specific on that, you will orphan pots of money so that they will never be large enough to do anything. And so I would caution you not to do that. But I think we could develop a report that would satisfy all the concerns that are raised today. And so I would support second and third reading and leave it with us to bring back a report to see if we can convince you to give it fourth reading.
There's also no problem with tabling this item until you get your information. I mean, you know, I'd like to get more information also. I think that there's a lot of mixed feelings in here of what somebody needs, and if you give it second, third reading, it might be a month or two before we can give it the fourth reading. So why even give it second and third? Move a tabling motion and let's get the information that we need.
Unfinished speaking?
Okay, may I continue?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Because I appreciate Mr. Steblin's input. That leaves, of those things that I listed as needs, that only leaves transportation demand TDM strategy. And again, because at present the bylaw as drafted puts that in the hands of the GM engineering to work out with the developer. A commitment from the GM to bring back to council as a separate report on another day the intended items and measurements thereof around a TDM strategy would satisfy me on that issue. And I think that might get us to the point where we could deal with this second and third today, fourth not very long from now.
Mr. Zuzek?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. The key, as Mr. Steblin said, is to do a body of work that does not amount to a change to the bylaw. That's before you. And I'm sure that we can produce a set of draft guidelines, for example, that would not be embedded in a zoning bylaw. Simply be information draft guidelines on how the TDM measures would be evaluated and worked. And hopefully we can get that done at the same time that we're doing the principles paper.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hodge.
Okay. Okay. I mean, and currently we require one stall for a bedroom unit, and that's not going to change. And it's already lower than some of our neighboring communities in, well, New Westminster, Richmond, and Surrey. And the rate varies anywhere from 1.2 to 1.5. So, you know, I believe that, you know, some of our residents who choose to buy a one, you know, bedroom unit, they themselves may own two cars. So I think that we could, you know, be adding to the problem. So we're talking about lowering it from 1.5 to 1.35. Then we're talking about lowering it another 5% if the builder asks for a variance by providing, you know, alternative forms of transportation. It's you know, it's true. You know, the need for parking could go down in the future, but we can't predict the future. And that's one of the reasons why I like the cash in lieu, because it creates a fund to create parking in the future, because if we go too low, we'll have a fund to fix it. I live up on Burke Mountain, and lately I feel like I live in town center. The parking up there is a real problem. And I hear it's the #1 complaint I hear from my neighbors is the lack of parking. So how did we get in that spot? Well, a couple of years ago, we decided, with the best of intentions, for a number of reasons, that we were going to make narrower streets. We were only going to have less parking on only one side. Well, now we've got parking problems up there. We've got residents asking, up on Burke Mountain, asking for residents-only parking signs in front of their places of residence, which we can't do. I've been told that we can't do that. So, you know, and we can't go back and fix the problem. So what if we're making a mistake here? How do we go back and fix it? Well, one of the ways we go back and fix it is we have some money that we can go in and we can build parking. And it might be in Coquitlam. If that's where the problem is, that's where we spend the money. If it's down in town center, that's where we spend the money. It's an insurance. To me, it's an insurance that we are doing the right thing, because I don't have a crystal ball, but I believe in insurance and making sure that decisions that we make today are best for the citizens in tomorrow. And, a fellow from the UBDI said, well, he's the voice of development industry and the voice of new residents. Well, I'm the voice of today's residents and the voice of tomorrow's residents. And the decisions that I make tonight are going to have far-ranging effects, and we got to make sure that we get this right. And so I feel more comfortable having some money set aside, that if we don't quite get it right and our crystal ball isn't accurate, we've at least got a way to go in and fix it. And I believe that the new apartment residents will benefit, even if they don't have the parking spots in their unit. They'll benefit from some of the money that will be spent on the multimodal improvements. And when you have a good supply of parking, that benefits commercial development in the area, makes their downtown or their Coquitlam area becomes more vibrant, because if there's not parking, businesses won't set up there. So it's about creating a balance. It's about sharing the risk it's about sharing the risk of tomorrow with today's taxpayers. It's about finding the right balance. It's asking developers to contribute to parking fund and it's not even going to cover the entire cost. It's only a contribution. The rest of our residents are going to have to contribute as well. And they're going to have to contribute to a parking supply so that they can park in their own city. And we've heard that we won't need as much parking because we live on a transit line. Well, this area will never have the transit service that Vancouver and Burnaby have. And we will need destination parking for residents. I mean, here we are tonight at a meeting that started at 7 o'clock right in the middle of our downtown. This is downtown Coquitlam. And I bet not one of us took a bus to get here tonight. So we're right in the middle of a transit area, and we all drove and we all parked. Now, granted, SkyTrain's not here yet, but supposedly we have transit in Coquitlam, and it's not working right now. So there will never be adequate bus service here in Coquitlam. One of our residents spoke about a discussion that she had at the last transit meeting just last week over at the Evergreen. I was standing right beside her when a transit planner said there will never be transit on Burke Mountain like there is down here, and that people on Burke Mountain should not be building homes on Burke Mountain, because if they want to be use transit, they should live near a transit line. And he repeated that later to the mayor as well. So that's TransLeak's position. That came from one of their planners. So we are never going to have buses going in three directions every 5 minutes like they have in downtown Vancouver. So our residents need a place to park. If they're going to come down to the town center and use our library and use our facilities and use the sports fields, they're going to need to have a place to park. I coach soccer. I have yet to see anybody arrive at my soccer game on a bus, and that includes when I play games in Vancouver. People will use cars to get around. They'll use transit to go to work in the morning and come back, but when they get to Coquitlam, they're going to need transit, or they're going to need their cars, because they're not going to have the options. And if they're given the option only by one spot and they have two cars, the other one is going to go out in the street, just like in the West End. And now we're already talking about how we're going to solve the problem. And we're going to have parking permit systems, or we're going to have all these different systems to control parking. And what if we just push the problem out into the shoulder area? To me, the answer is, if we're afraid we're going to have a problem, then we're not making the right decision today. We're already worried about, well, how we're going to fix the problem if we get it wrong. To me, the way to fix the problem if we get it wrong is to have a solution to fix it, and that means, having some money set aside that we can build a structure if we need it. And, I've heard from other areas, but the mayor of Burnaby has been outspoken on times saying that, in their area, it hasn't worked. That they do have areas of the city that has parking, and they have transit. We've heard that the people who are moving in, well, why should they fund a parking that they're never going to use? Because it's going to be for the rest of us. Well, I have to use a car, because where I live on Burke Mountain, I have to have a car. But every time I fill up my gas tank, I'm contributing to a transit system that I'm never going to use. And yet the people who have the benefit to use that transit system should be making a contribution back towards the parking in this area. So I think it's a give and take by everybody. It's about sharing the responsibility and sharing the needs. I don't like everything that's proposed, but this is a compromise. It lowers the parking. Maybe it brings us back to the right level. Because I don't want to see 4 levels of parking with the bottom level empty either, because that's not good for the residents, it's not good for the environment, there's a whole lot of reasons. So the trick is, how do we hit it right? We don't want to go too low, and we don't want to have too much. But I like this process, I like this bylaw, because it streamlines the process for the developers. They're not going to have to go to development variance permits. This is going to be straightforward. It's going to be a level playing field within in the transit area. It's going to spread the risk between new residents and today's taxpayers, and it recognizes that, yes, we won't need as much parking. And it's already suggesting that we drop the ratio. And then, from 1.5 to 1.35, and then they can go another 5% if they want. And then at the end of the day, if they want to go lower, they only pay for 50% of what the parking stall is actually going to cost. So even the developers will get a benefit. Now, we've heard figures of anywhere that a spot can cost anywhere from $30,000 to $55,000. But either way, $20,000 is a good deal, because it helps them to get to the number that they feel that they may need. It levels the playing field. Having that fund, it gives us options, and it gives us insurance that we are doing the right thing for the future. Thank you.
Councilor Raymer.
Thank you. I too, I'm actually going to support this, going through a second and third, and I'll look forward to the information that staff provides. Back after we passed this through first reading, I knew that we didn't have enough information on which to make a decision. I knew that there were bodies out there telling us we were being too conservative, and then other bodies telling us that we weren't being conservative enough. And now that I've seen attachment 1, I actually realize with this comparison of the other municipalities that our staff actually, I think, got this really right. We're right in the middle. This is a middle-of-the-road recommendation. I was initially concerned about the $20,000 per stall. However, I have been convinced that should stand. And I don't know what the take-up on that's going to be. I really actually don't think that we're going to know the true results of this until we actually have SkyTrain in our city. I do think, though, that once you build it, they will come. We've seen that with our public library recently, which we built, and boy, all the people that have been using it is unbelievable. And I think it's going to be the same thing with our Evergreen line. So, having said all of that, I am going to support this through second and third. I know staff is working on a parking management plan, and I look forward to hearing a few more details about that plan before fourth reading. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I got great difficulties with this item. I really have, because Councillor Hodge mentioned, parking permits. Okay, you give parking permits, who's going to enforce it? A whole bunch of bylaw enforcement officers. That's what you can have. A lot more staff. If you're wrong, you'll have to develop parking lots. Whose land is it going to be? The taxpayers' land that we'll be using to build parking lots. For who? For developers in the area. And you think for 1 minute that all these breaks that we're giving, $20,000 and all that, it doesn't benefit the developers? Of course it does. It only benefits the developers. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything for the people in the different areas live here. And I shouldn't debate it anymore, because I do not believe that the chair should be debating anything. But frankly, if I wasn't the chair, I'd be debating in great more detail. So I will not be supporting this. I will not support the second, third reading. I'd rather have it tabled until we get the full report. So anyways, and unless there's any other speakers, all those in favor? Second and third? Second, third. Opposed? Councillor Reid and myself are opposed. It's carried. Next item.
Item 10, School District Number 43, 2012 eligible school site proposal. The recommendation is that Council accept the eligible school site proposal submitted by School District Number 43 and direct staff to relay the city's concerns to School District 43 regarding the alignment of their capital plan with city plans set out in the report of the GM Planning and Development.
It's been rightly moved and seconded. In discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Next item.
Item 11 relates to the UBCM Age-Friendly Community Project Grant. The staff recommendation is that Council direct staff to submit a funding application to the UBCM for an age-friendly community project grant to engage new immigrant seniors in outdoor experiences in Coquitlam.
It's been rightly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item.
Item 12 is the Metro Vancouver Board in Brief dated November 16th, 2012. The recommendation is that Council receive the Metro Vancouver Board in Brief for information.
Been rightly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Anything around the table from the council members? I have one. Matter of fact, at the next meeting, when the mayor is back, I intend to serve a notice of motion on monster houses. On what? On monster houses. These huge houses that we call monster housing. I think, and I'm not going to debate it. It's just a comment that I'm making. That I'll be. No, because I'm in the chair, I can't serve notice of motion. Okay? So that's what it is, okay? Anyways, is there a motion to adjourn? Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Any comments from the public on tonight's meeting? Any comments from the public on tonight's meeting? There's none. Thank you and good night.